Greetings, all. It is Cameron of the Antics, and I'm here with Mr. Hodges, and hopefully my recording doesn't stop again, but I'll know if it does. Mr. Hodges, how you doing today?
I am good. How are you doing, Cameron?
I'm doing lovely. I'm sitting here. I'm eating some pretzels from Trader Joe's. Living the good life.
Life sounds good.
Yeah.
So I understand you went to go see a film the other week on World War I, 1917.
Yes, I did. I watched it yesterday in my living room because the internet.
The wonders of technology.
The wonders of technology. And I think that the wonders of technology really stood out in that film due to the impeccable editing and the lightweight cameras that they used in filming to really follow the actors in this crazy elaborate set that really made you feel like you were part of the action. That was what I felt was the coolest part of 1917. But what did you think about like the story?
Well, the story seemed almost secondary to me. What struck me the most, what sat with me the most in the trailer shows this. It says adrenaline. And it felt like I was not just there. I wasn't just watching a movie, like Dunkirk. I love Dunkirk, but I felt like it was a third-person experience. I was watching it, but it was second. It wasn't part of me. I wasn't in this. I felt like I was brought into the scenes in this movie. And Sam Mendes I have a huge amount of respect for him.
Definitely. As
a director, and I don't know who his cinematographer was, but it felt like I was there. And because of that, it brought me in and it led me there all 2 hours, and there was a beauty to it and in a way, humanity. Even though it was about war, there were some scenes that struck me as looking at human events and issues.
Absolutely.
Like, well, I don't want to give it away for those who haven't seen it. There's a wonderful scene in a city that's burning with, he runs into someone.
I'll put a spoiler alert on the podcast if you'd like to talk about that scene for a second. Well,
so the character makes his way into a city, and he's trying to escape being shot at by the Germans, and he runs into a young woman who turns out has a little baby, and he ends up providing assistance, but also it frames a perspective for him that's not just the villains he's fighting against, but there's humans in the middle of the death and destruction of this war.
I love how the movie really started you off like it was like not high intensity but not low intensity. It was like just the right intensity to like get the train rolling, where you're in the trenches, right? There's not really like you're not thrown in the middle of a battle, but you're like thrown in the middle of this like start to this journey. And I thought that was very like well filmed. It was so just like interesting how these 360 camera angles were just like you literally felt like you were a dude going along with these people on this adventure to save 1,600 men from a trap from the Germans.
Yep.
Dude. Also, Mr. Hodges, I think a peak for me was really that plane scene when
what did you like about that?
The incredible way that it they introduced this idea of a plane about to crash, and then just how it looked cinematically, where they're just like looking at this dogfight. It's just really interesting perspective being on the ground with these guys looking up at a dogfight, and then them being like, "Oh, who's winning?" "Oh, us, I think." And the plane goes down, and it literally crushes the house or the barn that they're standing at. And
spoiler alert potential, though, by the way, just so you know.
Spoiler alert, yes. But God, how it was such an act of humanity what they did to the man in the pilot of the crashed plane.
And subsequent to that scene, I didn't see it at the time, but my partner, she was mentioning, did you notice the scene where he runs into the platoon and they're all like pissing? And to me, there was something symbolic about like the folly of war, just like from what he experienced in that scene with his friend to what he was going to do next.
I noticed that. I thought that was a very interesting thing. I didn't really think deeply about it, but I was just like, these guys are all peeing on this house that just got crushed.
Yeah.
It was very strange. But I felt so betrayed about the German pilot that killed our protagonist from the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That was just
trying to help.
And I was I felt betrayed, Mr. Hodges.
Yeah, that was tough, and his friend had saved the main character, right?
Yeah. I thought it was so cool just how like time like literally passed as like it was seamless. There was no like, oh, it's night now. You were literally like you were with him for sunset. There was one like car scene where he was in a car and they were just trucking on down the path.
Right, when he was with that patrol, right.
And I thought it was interesting. I noticed one thing that the captain said when he was like, make sure there's witnesses.
Right, because he didn't necessarily trust the commander.
Yeah.
Right.
He said, make sure there's witnesses when you give him this order to call off this attack. And I thought he said some men just want the fight. I thought that was a very scary sounding sentiment from that guy. What did you think about? What was going through your head when you were?
I was listening to that, and I was thinking of the burden that fell on the protagonist's shoulders now that his friend was dead. He gets that information. He's going off across no man's land. I guess he was already across no man's land. He's up against the German trenches, and the fate of 1,600 people weighs even more heavily on his shoulders at that point. And the I don't know. Another spoiler alert: when he's running along to deliver the message, when everyone's retreating, it was just.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So I'm gonna dovetail or digress off the initial question you asked, Cameron, about history and films. To me, if I had my druthers, if I could teach a class that I'm not teaching now, I would love to teach a class on historical fiction and historical film. Because so often, nonfiction writing and often in films, you can either have a story that's told in book or in film in a boring way, in a non-engaging way. And when a movie can achieve that, albeit historical fiction, it was apparently the story of Sam Mendes' grandfather.
I heard
or
about
loosely based on that.
at the end where it said dedicated to.
But I think there's a big role in that. Film can play. It's not documentary, as well as good historical fiction. And I think that movie did a really good job, because otherwise hopefully can connect people to what happened. And that's a war. We have no monument in the United States to that war. Granted, we were only in it the last year and a half. But there's no World War I monument. In Washington, D.C., there's World War II, there's Korean War, there's Vietnam War. No World War I. And there's no one left living from that war.
Yeah. When you recommended it to me, you said something about how it was a tough movie to get through, but you kind of feel better for it after going through that. What do you think were some of the hardest parts to get through of that movie?
I think knowing what I know about the war, to me, with so many wars, the senselessness, retrospective-wise, of the war, like what the hell were we doing, the way so many people died. I don't know if I remember a scene with the rats, but just, I just can't imagine. It made me think about what it would be like, and it decreased the whole generation of Europe. The last generation is about people who lost faith in wanting to live, and that's what to me led to a lot of alcoholism, whether it's Steinbeck or Hemingway or some of the great people who wrote in the 20s were carried on the burden of that war.
Yeah, it was a war like marketed as the war to end all wars, but really it just deeper entrenched the culture of war into modern society.
And since then, we've had, well, after World War II, we developed this weapons of mass destruction and military-industrial complex, and now people seem pretty callous to it.
Pretty calloused.
Pretty, doesn't seem, I guess people don't want to think about it because it's too horrible to think about. That's,
so then when we see it, people, filmmakers choose not to forget and instill that idea of not forgetting to the masses through a very popular medium, which is film. So what I want to talk about is just how these events that seem like they should be teaching us to to learn from history that I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase it. You kind of see where I'm going, with the idea of films helping us learn about I don't know, man.
Can I jump off?
Yes. Yeah.
Even if it's not where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes there's lessons learned. I thought that movie was a palatable movie, if I may say so. It wasn't too brutal. I appreciate how Mendes made it, created it, wrote it, filmed it in a way that didn't make me want to turn my head. I felt like I wanted to keep paying attention, even though you didn't know if the people would survive. Mm-hmm. So often, when we look at history, lessons can be so devastatingly hopeless. Digressing to a film that made me feel that way, which was a brilliant film. One of my favorite directors is Spike Lee, who did Black Klansman. Mm-hmm. And after that movie, I felt more hopeless than I had for a long time about racism and where we're going with it. So I appreciate what Mendes did with. Thank you. Not to get on too heavy of a topic there, Cameron.
Oh no, you're golden. You're golden, man. I was just thinking about a movie that I recently watched. Sorry to Bother You. It's a Boots Riley film.
Don't know it.
Oh, it's phenomenal, and that was seriously, go check that out. But basically, you said Black Klansman made you feel really hopeless about it. Sorry to Bother You. Really, it made me feel hopeless, but just more of a good kind of hopeless. It was like I'm aware, but then this issue that is being addressed seems insurmountable. However, there's so many other positive goods to focus on. Like,
thank you.
The movie was like a joyride of just like crazy. It was like fun. It was a fun thing to go and enjoy. And then, but it was tackling a lot of serious issues like labor unionization, and then like profiting off of like atrocities in today's society. And I just thought how about it. There was an underlying theme of like art is the answer. It's like art is the answer, and I thought that was just like it was beautifully weaved in to the fabric of like the message of the movie, and So yes,
I will check it out.
Check that out.
I appreciate the recommendation.
Of course.
Because to me, ultimately, I can stomach both super. How do I say it? Films, both documentaries or stories that are whether documentary movies or fiction, or books that are nonfiction versus historical fiction. I want to read all different perspectives, and sometimes I think I need to dive into a more cynical view. But I ultimately do feel that there's a resilience to us as humans that it's most important. Like you said, it's not just the art, but if we're aware, if as long as we look at the dark caverns of our past, it will lessen the likelihood of continuing to repeat those mistakes.
Absolutely.
So
I think people get detached a lot of the time from war, knowing that it's just like robots flying over and killing these innocent people. When you get up close in a film like 1917, it really I feel it personalizes war, it humanizes it more than a lot of how.
No, that's
really
well
is.
said. It was just the opposite of feeling detached that it can happen to me in certain films or reading certain books. I felt because it drew you in, it kept me there, and it made me think a lot because of that. Versus something more hopeless. I read a movie I would recommend it in a guarded way called, it's a documentary called Restrepo, and it's based on the story of a journalist who wrote a book called War. Sebastian Junger wrote the book Perfect Storm. They made a movie of the fishing boat that was, and he's been posted on duty off and on for like 2 years, and he was mostly in Afghanistan. In this one book he wrote called War, and they made this documentary called Restrepo. I couldn't watch it.
Yeah,
it was I felt completely nihilistic from it. But it's just a challenge. I mean, I can choose, and I read a lot, but I don't want to go into something that's completely where I leave the experience. The book, I couldn't read the book, and I couldn't watch I read the 50 pages of the book War, and then this documentary Restrepo was made about this. I gave it to Mr. G next door. I don't know if he still has it, but I couldn't. It was too like, okay. It was like, what? Did you ever see the Coen Brothers' No Country for Old Men?
No, I haven't seen that one.
Same thing. I was like, okay. I want to, even if it seems falsely created, I think it's important to know that there's hope.
Yes, absolutely.
And otherwise, especially in a piece of film, and even the way that was told, but I'm now at the point where I can't, for almost any conflict, I'm so wary of our country going into send young people into conflict for a cause that I don't feel is often relevant now.
Absolutely.
And I feel really strongly that.
Yeah, man, it's strange how these ideas of what's acceptable in today's military versus how it's progressed. Like, Boots Riley was saying in an interview. I watched a lot of Boots Riley interviews after that because I was just fascinated by a lot of his intentions on certain subtle details of the movie. But one thing he talked about was he related it to musicians, because he used to be a musician, and he talked about how in the music industry, a lot of record labels warned artists against talking about arguing against bombing Afghanistan. And Boots Riley, he went out and he said, he was like, we can't, it was like, this is a tragedy, 9/11's a tragedy, but we shouldn't be using this to justify going over and taking control and destabilizing the Middle East. And it was just like, that was such like a taboo thing to say. Yeah. And it's just so...
So he really kept his neck out in that one. He stuck it out. And
absolutely.
That was a slippery slope. The whole, weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and leading to Iran and being in the Korangal Valley, which is we finally pulled out of, and what that, I can't imagine what that's done to the soldiers, the warriors, and I honor them. And remember, did you see the vets last year, the Vietnam vets?
Yes, I did.
Saying thank you for your service. My father-in-law was in Vietnam. My daughter's being trained as a doctor with the Air Force, and hopefully she'll never see combat. But it's tough to know what they went through, whether in World War I in 1917 or what these guys went through in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Do you think it's necessarily a good thing to associate a lot of patriotism when it comes to war and like the sometimes senseless decisions of the American government?
I think it's natural that it occurs. I think it has been. I'm teaching World War I now, and just finished teaching an 8-push class. And it's a byproduct that's going to happen with almost any war. I don't know. It's going to happen, but it's also a matter of being aware of what is patriotism and that becoming nationalism or ethnocentrism and then that becomes anger, because I'm also wary of what people can become under through the lens of stridency and bias.
So is in film is necessarily glorifying, because a lot of it depending on how you look at it, you just making money off of it is in some way, shape, or form glorifying it. So is that necessarily a good, a positive thing when it's meant to inform?
Yeah, that's it. I don't know if I can answer it. To me, I look at stepping off that question to the idea of journalism in general, because there can be, when I look at journalists throughout history, you remember studying the Muckrakers last year?
Of course, yeah.
Who to me played such a crucial role in looking at the robber barons and looking at the jungle. But then again, at what point does that become yellow journalism? Where the stridency of the news media, whether it's extremes now, I won't even mention names of the film, television media, it's at what point are people just putting out information to sell what they're selling? And it may not even be from the perspective of a person who, like MSNBC, more liberal, Fox, conservative. It's tough. I'm not sure if I'm answering that right. To me, as long as one can remain as objective as possible, but that's why I appreciate blogs, I appreciate podcasts so much, because I can watch, I read, but I can't watch national news anymore. It just gets me so pissed off, and it doesn't matter whether it's one extreme politically or another.
Absolutely.
Can't. And I can't look at the men with the orange hair. I just can't.
Nope.
Gets you
hot and bothered.
Hot and bothered. So.
Hot and bothered.
But it's interesting to think of. Ultimately, I feel much more hopeful with your generation than I did with mine. I feel cynical about what my generation's done. I look at the cast of characters running for president with Democrats, and I think that's all you got. And I'm hoping, with the thinking and the perspective that your generation has, what you guys have thought with feminist issues, the third generation.
The movements are developing,
and now it's time
to act on them. Right?
It's time to act, but also thoughtfully act, and just going out there. And then I was a kid during the Vietnam War, so it didn't affect me. I knew people whose older brothers were involved, but it was like people got in protest. It's like, why are you out there protesting?
It wasn't like personal.
It wasn't personal. It wasn't. To me, it's more finding something you're committed to, and not just going out and screaming and yelling, but
identity.
Yeah.
Identifying with an issue.
Identifying with an issue.
Absolutely.
So, Cameron, I have to use the bathroom before we go, but I thank you for bringing me into this, and I hope it's not the last time I get a talk.
Of course. Sounds good, man. Until next time.
Until next time, Cameron. Thank you.
Have a lovely rest of your day.
Have a lovely rest of your day, too.
Peace.